Hi, welcome to Design Tools, the State of Play. We're going to be talking about various prototyping tools and static design tools and how they were created and where they came from. My name's Chris Conover, and I'm from Google, and I'll be moderating the panel. And first, I'd like to thank you all for being here, as well as introduce the panel. So if you could all just say your name and the tool you work on, and give us a one-sentence explanation of what the tool does.
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Parteek. I'm a designer on a mobile prototyping tool called Form.
Hi, I'm Koen. I'm a co-founder of Framer. It's an interactive design tool to design anything that you basically can come up with.
My name is Justin Belcher. I'm a designer on Pixate, and Pixate is a visual design prototyping tool.
My name is Pieter Omvlee. I'm the founder of Sketch, and Sketch, you may know, is a visual design tool which you can use to design mobile apps, sites, icons.
Great, thanks. A couple other notes. Again, thank you for being here. We want to make this panel very interactive. So if at any point you guys have questions, just raise your hand, and we have 2 people with microphones on the sides. And they will give you a microphone, and at the next pause in the conversation, we'll go ahead and take the questions as they come. Also, just to gauge the audience, how many of you guys have used a prototyping tool before or use it in your daily work? Go ahead and raise your hands.
Nice.
Awesome. Very cool. So for the first question, I want to ask you guys about the design process and at what point you see your tools being used. So obviously, people start off with an idea, maybe they do some sketching, but a lot of people have different takes on when they should go to higher forms of fidelity. Can you just give me your opinion on when they should be using your tool?
Yeah, I think for me personally, like it just kind of depends on like the type of work I'm doing. So if I'm in a stage where I have like a new concept or like a new sort of thought on like how a certain design should be on the phone, I might just jump directly into Form and just kind of like whip up whatever I need to do to like explain the concept to others. And that can be anywhere during like the early wireframe stages where like you don't really have anything high fidelity, but it could also be later on in the stage where you're like almost close to shipping, but you need to get an idea across. So yeah, it just kind of like varies for me. Yeah, I don't know how it is for you guys.
Yeah, I think for us we see 2 sort of, apart from sort of the normal thing where you use it to prototype, sort of like getting through the stages that you did a visual design and start prototyping, we see 2 very specific things, I think. One is that if you're working on really complex interactive problems, you sometimes just can't predict if your ID will work. And to have like an interactive version of that ID to quickly validate whether it will work or to be able to show it to somebody, you can actually use it very early in the process. So that's one thing that we see. And the other thing that we see is it's like a really good ID generation tool. So we see a lot of people just basically screwing around with prototypes, and they run into something they couldn't have thought of in their head because they, like in the process, they discover something new, and they can use that to actually solve a real problem. And I think those are super interesting areas.
Yeah, you definitely see things kind of flipping a bit, I think because a lot of designers are coming from a very visual-heavy background. That's kind of where we were used to starting, and a lot of people find as they get very deep into that execution or playing around those ideas, once they got to the interaction, especially if you're doing some sort of a mobile experience, that you try to figure out kind of, how do I make this real? How do I make this interactive now? And that was kind of the wrong time because you made too many design assumptions at that point. So we're seeing people more and more kind of trying to flip that a little bit and thinking about the interaction initially because that tends to be, the most complex piece of the experience to build. That tends to be kind of like the hardest design challenge for a lot of experiences that are being created these days. So there's seeing a lot of value for people actually kind of starting more in that side and then treating a lot of the aesthetic execution a little bit more of an execution detail down the line once they've kind of nailed what the user journey is and what the overall kind of interaction is.
Yeah, I guess for Sketch, the answer is yeah, basically whenever you want to use it. I mean, you can start on the paper or start immediately in Sketch. So yeah.
If I can add one more thing, like a prediction that I sort of tried to make here is that we now see a lot of products being, like most of the iterations in product are now still visual iterations and like 1 or 2 rounds of interactive like iterations. I think that's really going to shift. I think we're going to see a few less visual iterations and way more interactive iterations, because it's just like that's the part where you explore like really new stuff, I think.
That's a great point. And I think to follow up with that, I have a question around when do designers find the time to learn these new interactive tools? Obviously, a lot of people have been using Photoshop or Sketch or static design tools, even just sketching simple ideas for a long time. But now there are all these new possibilities, and everyone has deadlines. They have other obligations like family. How do you make it as easy as possible to learn a new tool?
It's tough. Usually the day is pretty packed, and it's hard to like kind of get that motivation to like take the time to learn something. But I think like one of the best times is like when you're like even starting up on a new project and you're kind of like in this thinking that like we're gonna do things right this time, like our process is gonna be great, like our like the tools we're gonna use, or like the product we're gonna create, like everything is gonna go so well, and like you're very optimistic at that time. And I think that's usually a good time to like dive into something and begin to explore it and see if like this will actually help you. But like sometimes you're not in the middle or not at a beginning of a project, and if you're in the middle, like I think having it's tough, like even taking out the time like during certain parts of the day where you're like, okay, maybe like I need to explain like a certain concept or something, like I know this tool will do it, like let me take a stab at like solving this. And that's where I think if the tool is relatively easy to pick up on, then you will be able to kind of produce something, keep on going. But if it's a little bit difficult, then you'll definitely be less motivated to kind of go through it.
Great. So kind of giving the user an opportunity to have quick and early success with your tool to motivate them.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think for us, I always believe that like really good designers are always trying out new tools and new methods and trying to learn about new things that are going on. It's also like a very normal state for the profession of a designer that everything around that keeps changing. I think like in the 10 years of like everybody using Adobe, that was a very unnatural state for a designer. So I think if you are a good designer, then I would urge you to try out a bunch of these new things, because every sort of generation of design or how the profession was the profession was defined, it became totally different. And I think we're just seeing that now. So I would urge you not do it in a project or while under the press of a deadline or when your family needs you or whatever. Do it on like a free Saturday afternoon, enjoy it, have some fun, you know, try to see what you can make with it. And I think that's just part of being a good designer, is trying to figure out these new things.
Yeah, I think obviously, you know, if you keep the tool very close to the designer's mental model, there's a lot of advantage you have with kind of building off of, you know, experiences they already have with tools and expertise they probably have. But I think also, you know, and to your point too, I think there's an obligation we kind of have as designers to where this is the job. And, you know, obviously learning how to express and communicate and, you know, do development of the design of these things can be tedious, especially if it requires us to kind of pick up new tools to learn new experiences and things like that. But, you know, for better or for worse, it's kind of up to us to have rigor in our practice so that, you know, we are actually vetting and validating all of our design decisions. And, you know, that's always the tension. You know, we want to make this type of tooling accessible to people. We want to obviously you know, be empathetic about people's schedules and stuff like that, but also, you know, the practice is what it is, and I think we all have a responsibility to, you know, do what's necessary to do the work that we're being asked to do, and sometimes that might mean, you know, learning a little bit of code, that might be learning more complicated tools, you know, something like that. So I don't necessarily know that our answer is to kind of produce the lowest common denominator designer, but really make sure that we all understand that this is kind of a responsibility we have, and we want to keep building off that and furthering the profession as we get into these more dynamic, you know, interactive experiences instead of just being, you know, living in a static world like we have for so long.
Well, obviously for Sketch, the question is quite different. I mean, you don't need to convince people that they need to use a tool like Sketch or Photoshop. Whereas, at least in the past, with these prototyping tools, it was a new thing that you had to pick up. The question for us was basically like, okay, when can we get these designers to try our tool? And we had our first success with the freelance designers who start like a new project every few months, and at every new thing they started, well, maybe this is the time I should try out this new app I've heard of. But yeah, the step is quite a bit simpler than adopting an entire new kind of tool.
Actually, something to add on also is like, I remember when I was like switching over to Sketch from Photoshop, like a big driver of it was, for one, like seeing people beginning to like just talk about it like on the internet and be like, oh, like Sketch was like popping up in a few places. And I was like, okay, what is this? And then as you go and check it out and you see, and you're able to sort of like, you start like playing around in it and you kind of realize that a lot of the paradigms in there like are relatable to a lot of designers. So it's really easy to kind of get yourself into it. And it's like, oh, okay, if I want to draw a rectangle, like I kind of know how to do that in Illustrator. I assume it's like a similar concept here. It's like, yeah, it is. You like drag and you create it, right? And so being able to like kind of see that link happen is really nice. But like also another thing is in terms of like just finding time and picking it up. Like I've been just like messing around with like Max MSP, like completely different type of tool. But when I like started kind of like I just downloaded it and started messing around in it, and like I followed a tutorial that was kind of right there on the side with me. Spent about half an hour, and the idea of, or like just the experience of spending half an hour and having something that was done and working and like I was playing with felt really satisfying, and just kind of like makes you want to like keep on going, like try the other thing, even if it's like other tutorials. You just want to like keep on. You kind of get more motivated, I think. So yeah, like even like having tutorials on the side was like a good way for getting excited.
Definitely.
Yeah, hooking up to like, when do you find time to learn these new tools? It's also like, we have to realize that this is the beginning of that. Like, it's not going to stop from here. Because, can I do a quick poll? Like, who is designing for VR today, virtual reality, in the audience? One person, maybe two. So these are like the best designers in the world, right? And VR is going to ship in 2016. Like that, I assume that like all the first experiences in VR are going to be bad because of that. Because we have to fix that as a design community. There's like, we have to get on that. And like VR is like an order of magnitude more complicated again than just like some interactive design. So from here, it's only going to get harder and harder and harder. So the time to invest in these new tools and these new ways of thinking and like physics and real 3D is going to be a part of like being a really good designer from now on forward.
Definitely. And as we see more and more tools coming onto the landscape, and it seems like every week we get a new prototyping tool, or a new way to like version control your files. We're going to like make choices and kind of be aware of this stuff. Something that really interested me recently was Koen ran a survey on his website, subtraction.com, and it basically asked designers a bunch of questions. And one of those questions was, what tools are you using for interface design? And the results came back, and Sketch was actually at the top of that list, above Photoshop, which is really awesome. I'm sure that didn't happen overnight, and I'm sure there's a long story of Sketch. So Pieter, would you mind kind of talking about how Sketch came into life, how you started, and what the journey's been like so far?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I guess I started this as a very simple drawing application, hence the name, which is now not really, which doesn't really fit the app anymore. But just me trying to build a little drawing tool. But I had worked with enough designers on other apps that I knew that they were all somewhat unsatisfied with Photoshop. So 5 years ago, I teamed up with the designer, and we decided we were going to try and expand my simple app into something that he could use for himself to replace Photoshop. And so we launched that approximately 4 years ago, and turns out he was not the only one who could replace Photoshop with that. And the 4 years since, we've slowly added all the missing features and expanded in all those areas that we initially didn't have to have time for. And we've all been a bit surprised by how large this market actually turns out to be. And yeah, we started and we thought, well, this could make a nice living, because there must be a few designers interested in interface design. But yeah, the market is quite big, and I'm sure the environment changing also helped, like the enormous explosion of mobile. I remember that I already had Sketch, and I saw Apple introduce the iPhone. So this is going to be an interesting thing to make software for. And then you could only make them in JavaScript, I think. Maybe one day. So this explosion of mobile has certainly helped us enormously, and it's been quite an amazing ride for the last 5 years.
Awesome. And at what point did you realize that you were onto something and you're kind of gaining traction and you're going to give Adobe a run for their money?
There were a few of those moments where you think, like, wait a minute, we actually have something here. It's like maybe 3 years ago when when Adobe decided to discontinue fireworks. Many people instantly started asking, okay, what do we use now? And we thought, well, they could use Sketch, so we tried to do a little bit of marketing around that, and we got an amazing response from that. It was for a long time to come after that. That one week was our biggest spike in sales. So then you think, well, we have something here, and probably Adobe even didn't realize that the market was this big. And we had a similar spike again around version 3 when we finally were able to launch some of the most requested features. But all in all, it has been a very slow but steady climb up. So there hasn't been this big moment like, okay, this is the one where we made it.
That's great. It's awesome that you've been able to slowly refine your product, like bringing the users along with you and bringing in their colleagues and friends, etc. Going back to that design tool survey I mentioned before, there was also a section on prototyping tools. And the winner of that section ended up being HTML and CSS. People were saying, every time I need to do a prototype, I just code it from scratch. So I'd love to get your opinion, you three, since you all have prototyping tools that are designed to make it easier and faster for people to express their ideas. Did this surprise you? And if so, like, why do you think people are still coding?
I think for me, it wasn't actually too surprising, just because I feel like most people who would probably be prototyping are pretty well versed in like basic front-end development, and something like HTML, CSS just kind of taps into like that skill set that you already have, and connecting the dots of like I need to prototype something, and I know HTML, CSS, and JavaScript is like pretty easy, and they come together pretty well. So I think it makes sense that a lot of people would be doing that.
Yeah, for us, it's kind of logical, and I think Framer is also based around the idea that you can use these things to build really good prototypes. Framer is based on HTML, CSS, and JavaScript technologies. It's just we try to capture the best subset of like the combination of those technologies and do the best tooling around it to give you a really good prototyping experience. So an example is we let you only use specific, like we make the CSS for you in the background, which you can override yourself if you really wanted to, but we default to things that can be animated on the GPU, so it runs fast on your phone. We integrate with Sketch and with Photoshop to get your stuff directly into there. So we basically looked at, like this is what I saw like 3 or 4 years ago when I was just thinking about Framer, and like how can we get from like putting those two technologies together in the most efficient way to build prototypes really, really well. So for us, it's more like I think we can capture still a large part of that audience as well.
You're kind of an extension of coding. It's you've set up a lot of the framework around it to make it easy for people to do common interactions.
Yeah, I mean, if you are prototyping with HTML and CSS and JavaScript, you know that you have to set up some auto refreshing web server and your editor on one side, browser on the other side, and you open it up and you have to go back and forth and stuff. We take all that out. Like, I mean, one of the best stuff about like having a really good tool is that you have an ID and you get started right away without having to set up like gulp projects and figure out what the tool of the day is there. Just go at it, have like direct feedback on what you're doing. And I think these things are super powerful.
Yeah, I think, that statistic in the survey just points to a lot of kind of where the industry is right now. And obviously there's different need. If you're more of an app or product interface designer, you probably are doing a lot more prototyping than some agency folks who are a little bit more about communication design or experiences for brands and things like that. Yeah. But it does seem like we're going to grow in that direction anyways. We start, business models are shifting more and more into apps and mobile and things like that. So, I think it makes sense that that's where we're at right now. I know for us, looking at that as a possibility, and we kind of shifted more along to lines of trying to get designers to evaluate their decisions in a real native context. So a lot of the technology we built behind our tool was when you were actually demoing and playing with the prototypes themselves, they were built on real platform native APIs, and you were actually getting the real kind of experience of using stuff like that. And we found that that's been really valuable too. But I think because there's this wide spectrum of both experience and context that designers are coming to the table with, I think we're going to see that kind of proportion of people's experiences and what they go to first in order to do this stuff to be pretty diverse for a while. And as I said, I don't think we're actually trying to converge on any archetype of designer or experience or anything like that. I think like prototyping in general is going to be this broad thing, and I think we'll continue to see that, and there's going to be places for these types of tools for some time.
I wonder if a good majority of people use HTML, CSS because it's easy to get on board into that. It's sort of like your first introduction to prototyping. So you may not know about all the variety of tools out there yet and what they're good at. So HTML, CSS was a good start, and then now as sort of time goes on, they'll realize okay, I need I need to prototype this certain thing. So HTML, CSS doesn't do it. Which tool is out there that doesn't? Then maybe that can start to encourage people going to tools that do provide those type of features. Let's say I need you use something for camera or whatever. It might be easier to go into a different tool and encourage people to explore it. So I'm almost wondering if in a year from now, if that number of people who are doing HTML, CSS will go down and others will rise in a way. So it's kind of shifting the scales a little bit.
As people use more device features. Definitely, GPS is another good example, I think. You can do interesting things with that.
But they're available in the browser. Most of these things, like the camera, you can use in the browser. I think, if anything, over the last year, because when I started out with Framer, I was like, okay, we should probably move to WebGL at some point, right? Because then all the limits are gone. You can write custom shaders and do whatever you can come up with. But the browser has been holding up really, really well. There's Force Touch. Within 2 days, we support Force Touch because it's in the new Safari browser. You can use it right away. And we actually had people doing that before we even supported it because it was just there. So I think if anything, I got more and more secure that the browser will always be able to cover 80% of the stuff that you want to do, this stuff that you want to design in a really elegant way, and it gives you a really nice way to reason about. And all these people will be working on browsers, so there will be a lot of documentation around it. And I think, I'm pretty secure of the future of the browser in that regard.
So the browser is great for all the reasons you listed, but sometimes it suffers in terms of performance and silky smooth animations, things that matter a lot to designers. How do you help your community kind of surpass those issues?
Yeah, so a lot of here is actually teaching the community a little bit about why stuff is slow. And the thing is that if you use a browser in the right way, it's not slower than anything native. Because the way that we use a browser in Framer is we tell the GPU to draw a layer with pixels, and then you apply these matrix transforms in the background, and it's basically telling your GPU, okay, this is what needs to happen to that layer. And that's all 60 FPS. You can get up to 300 layers on a mobile device. That's enough for a lot of really complicated UIs. If you keep to those rules, you'll be able to create really speedy prototypes, and you can basically build anything. Now, the things where it gets slower is when you do things that you can't do on a GPU. And this is not just a thing for the browser, it's a thing for basically every rendering engine. As soon as the CPU gets involved, for example, you want to re-interpolate an image because you scale it up and down, so you scale the width and the height instead of the scale X and scale Y, things get slow pretty easily because it has to bounce up and down between the CPU and the GPU. These things are not like really browser specific, but it's easier to make these mistakes in the browser if you do HTML and CSS yourself and you're not an expert. That's also like a reason why we built Framers, that we default to all the right things that you can do there, so all your prototypes will be fast. I think you'll find our tool like one of the fastest out there.
All great points. I think another good point for HTML and CSS and Framer also is the ability to share your prototypes with clients or teammates in a pretty quickly way. I know Framer recently introduced a share feature where with one click you can upload it to the browser or to a server.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, that is nice. I mean, we're very optimized towards like WebKit browsers, so it's not like we don't optimize for, you can see it in IE6 or whatever. Like it will never even work on. Maybe it works in IE9. I don't know. But like everything that's a WebKit-based browser, so Chrome and Safari. Well, Chrome is actually Blink, but formerly WebKit-based, I guess. Supports our prototypes, and so we can just it's basically an HTML project that you can upload yourself, but we have a really easy button where you can we can upload it for you, and you can just send the link to anyone and they can play with it. And that is indeed one of the downsides of having a native environment. You have to install an app on the phone and then it has to run, and that is a little bit more of a, you have to go into App Store, download the app, install the app. It's not that much more of a hurdle, but it is a little bit extra of a hurdle.
One of the things I admire most about that feature is how simple it is. It's literally clicking one button and then it's done. You get a URL and you can send it. But I think some of my coworkers who wanted to use that feature couldn't because there's no security around it. I'm just curious if you guys thought about the security process, people keeping work confidential between them and their clients, and if you have any plans to fix those issues.
Yeah, so we offered Google this really good deal, so they can have this custom feature for a really good price. So if there's anybody in the room here that deals with that stuff at Google, get back to me and we'll build it for you.
Great. What about for everybody else? Do you have plans to?
Well, they'll get it for free at some point.
The free, okay, at some point. Fair enough. Okay, so next question for Parteek and Justin. Both of your prototyping tools have native apps. Mm-hmm. How do you feel about sharing work through them? Do you think it's reasonable to ask clients and non-designers to download a new app for each prototype just to view the work? Or do you think there's a future where perhaps there could be one app that allows you to view all types of prototypes or makes it easier in some way?
I think there could be one app. I'm not sure how that would work exactly, but in terms yeah, it does suck that you have to download it an app to view it, but at the same time that's sort of the not only is the nature of the tool, but also sort of sets an expectation of how this is going to work or how it'll behave. If you're downloading a native app, you're opening up the prototype, you're essentially doing everything on the device. Everything is sort of rendering natively, and it's kind of creating the experience of almost having a mini app running on the phone. And then you get the nice performance and all the features of it. I think it's really easy to sort of it makes it a lot more motivating to do all those steps. But yeah, I think sharing is a huge part, and right now it's not we definitely don't have the browser type of sharing, but even things like sharing prototypes right from the phone through iMessage or email add up pretty significantly.
Can I ask you something?
Yeah.
Would it be possible for you guys to write a WebGL renderer so you could share it on the web?
I don't know. That's a question for our engineering team. I would love to do that though. Yeah.
Free ID.
Yeah. Thanks, man.
And you mentioned actually sending stuff through iMessage or email, and with all three of your solutions, there's no way for people to comment on a specific thing in the prototype other than to write an email that says, hey, when I swipe down this way and go over two screens over and this happens, I don't like this. Do you think that's a problem? Do you guys have any plans to try to fix it?
I mean, yeah, definitely. One of the real challenges with interactive experiences, and not just animated experiences, but specifically stuff that's driven by gesture, where you really don't have a sense of what the user input's going to be. If you're trying to capture feedback or collaborate on that, it needs to be very contextual to that moment for the user. So that introduces a lot of complexity of the tools, because then they have to in any sort of a collaboration feature, it has to be aware of gesture. It has to be aware of kind of the history of interaction with the user. If it's more animatic or motion-based, it can be a little bit more temporal and tied to specific times, and maybe they can record a quick video or something like that. But I do think that's a challenge because right now a lot of our models of sharing are a little bit too just push it out and wait to hear what people think of it. So things about user testing, things about validating design decisions, A/B testing, all of that kind of goes with evaluating prototyping and things like that. Right now, we've got to get a lot better about how do we actually meaningfully capture and collaborate on feedback from users because, right now, we obviously know that system doesn't work. We get the, OK, well, come to my cube and tell me what I'm doing, or send me an email, or maybe do a screencast or something like that. But there's just, if we say that, installing an app to experience these experiences is a lot of friction, that kind of feedback is very high friction. So I think it's important for designers to have the ability to evaluate that and incorporate that feedback into their iteration. And that's definitely going to be a challenge for just prototyping in general. Now that you've given it to people to validate and communicate these ideas, what do you do with the input, and how do you capture that in a way that doesn't have any loss of signal? Because that's just very easy to do with once you get into gesture, once you get into interaction, it's not a comment on a static mock anymore. It's this experience.
Yeah, I agree with you. But like all the problems that you mentioned are like super valid. There's definitely some stuff to innovate there. And actually InVision is doing pretty well in this regard. I got to say, their execution there as a platform with collaboration is pretty good. But for us, it's more of a business decision. Like, if I'm on a table with VCs, they all tell you to build a platform, right? Like, and then you end up with like you should either build like a dribble for interaction or a collaboration platform. The thing is, though, that while there's still a lot to innovate there, what I want to focus on, and a good startup focuses on like a few problems, I want to focus on the tool itself, because I think Pieter proved to all of us that if you make a really good tool, that is where your users will come from. And if I were going to build a platform and do the collaboration, I think that will distract us a little bit from that, because I really feel that the prototyping tools that we see today are just the start of like what we're really going to use and what will really be the tools that you guys will use to create from VR to like simple iOS apps or prototype the web or whatever. And I want to invent that tool. So I'm going to focus all on that.
So follow-up question on that. Let's say InVision opened up their platform and said, hey, Framer, if you want to host your prototypes here, we'll give you all the collaboration stuff we already have, since they're so focused on that. Would you be interested in that? Is that better than building it yourself?
Yeah, I guess we can always talk.
Great. And earlier, you were mentioning that Framer has an integration with Sketch. And since we have both of you on the panel, I'd just like to hear a little bit more about how the integration happened. Maybe, Pieter, when did you have the idea to have like a developer API in Sketch that allows anyone to expand your tool?
Sketch has had a basic scripting support for 5 or more years, I guess. It's provided in a nice way with an open source library we are using, which basically exposes the complete insights of our app to the outside world for anyone who knows how to run the right tools. So we didn't have to do a lot. We just had to include this library, make a few samples, like this is how you do the most common things. And basically, if the people are smart enough, they can figure out anything. The first few years, not much happened with that. But as Sketch slowly gained some popularity, some people started to write little scripts. And I've always been amazed by what people have been able to write this way. Sometimes you have the idea that they know the application and all the insights as well as we do, and they are able to do amazing things with it. And from time to time, we have to help with it. This is how you do certain things, but everything basically just happened. We didn't have to do much. The library is there. People can use it. You can communicate with Sketch via the JavaScript bridge. So anyone who knows JavaScript can write these plugins. You can explore the layers in the document, export certain artboards, and then from there on, it's easy to integrate it with your tool, which is what we have done with helping Framer and all the other tools in Vision. They all use this open source scripting bridge that we built.
If I can add one more important thing there, though, is like, you say it's in there for 5 years, the scripting bridge, but it only got really good until like 2 years ago, right? Because I was integrating with Pete on Sketch, and then we run into this bug, and then so we had the luxury of like having Pete around to help us work around it. But if you tried this before, if you tried to make a plugin and you run into snags, try it again, because like it really improved over the last 1.5 years.
Yeah, the thing that happened was we ran into a bug in the JavaScript garbage collection in WebGL. When a plugin you wrote got beyond the certain amount of complexity, it would basically crash. And that is what we have fixed. And now you can write ridiculously complex things, and everything just works.
Awesome. I really also love the integration that Zeplin did with Sketch to allow you to easily share red lines and send specs to developers who could just click around and automatically know how wide to make a margin without asking you. It seems like a huge time saver.
There is one more thing we did. We have a little command line tool available to download on our site, which you can basically use to inspect and export assets out of Sketch. So a company like in Vision can host that tool on their servers and just extract the assets they want out of Sketch.
Awesome. So your tool is super focused right now, and you're working with other tools like Framer to basically pass on the static designs. Do you ever imagine a time where you bring in some of the interaction and motion into Sketch itself?
I would say perhaps yes, one day, but there is this problem of, well, one, there is a lot of other stuff that we want to do. And then secondly, there's the question of which aspect of prototyping do you want to integrate. It's like you can make very simple prototypes where you can basically go from one screen to the next to visualize a flow, or you can do the very complex things that these tools are doing. And where exactly we would fall on that spectrum is probably on the side of just simple, and then I'll allow all the other tools to do what they do best. I think we have enough work in other areas that I'm more than happy to let them experiment with all the interactive stuff.
Great. For a final question, I'm interested, what do you think is the most important part of prototyping or tooling for designers today? Like where are the biggest challenges and the biggest opportunities for people to use your tools and really succeed?
I'll give it a shot. I think, for me personally, I think looking at prototyping as this like discrete phase of design that happens often late just doesn't seem to fit. It doesn't seem to gel with how other design disciplines and industries have kind of approached that. I mean, really, we're not talking about, and then you get to the prototype phase. We're really just talking about design validation and developing design. So, I think there's going to be a real opportunity with us to just kind of adjust the practice so that we're really thinking about these moments and these experiences throughout the design process, and not just at the end when it's time to validate, because at that point, about facing or if you've started to build it, any sort of change of that is just very expensive. And as we know, like our industry moves very fast, so there's an imperative for us to have kind of get it right quicker, and that's just kind of on us as designers to have that ability to validate stuff as we go along. And then I think for us as tool makers and things like that, I really like what you said about having a real focus with tools and doing that really well, and there's room for different tools and stuff like that. But as an industry, we kind of have a challenge to figure out how all of this stuff works together in a way that isn't just, you know, walled garden from everyone else. Because it's so frustrating as a designer to always have to throw stuff in the garbage and then jump to another tool and redo all that work and then throw it in the garbage and redo it all. So, you know, I think in ways that other industries have kind of figured out how to pipeline and integrate with one another, I think that's going to be a big challenge for us moving forward, to see how we can take this design intent and make it a little less about the tool that you created it in and more just about, you know, validation of design.
I think for us, well, if you look at the sort of the prototyping tools or the sort of next level interaction design tools, you see like a really difference in approach, like basically two sides. You either start from like a really low learning curve and you give up some flexibility for it, and I think you guys have been doing that pretty well. Principal is doing that really well. The new version of Flinto is doing that really well. And then they're probably like their task is to work upwards of that sort of complexity curve. So they're gonna remove a bunch of these limits over time in very smart ways to sort of keep that low learning curve, but let you do more and more. I think we and Form started out on the other side. So we started with code, Form started out with visual programming, and our task is going to be how do we lower the learning curve? And it doesn't really mean how do you learn people how to code, although that is the most awesome side effect from our tool, that people start to really understand code. But I think the real future of these tools is going to be a mix of code and UI that works together in a very sensible way. Typing in an exposition for an object on a screen just feels weird. You want to have direct manipulation in that regard. You want to have a timeline for other stuff. You want to have like, I don't know, a curve to draw your spring on for other things. And I think like the challenge for us is to bring all these UIs together into a really well-balanced tool that will allow you to create anything that you want in the best possible way. So you'll see us trying a bunch of those things over the next year.
Yeah, I think a big part, at least for us, is that, like, for one, lowering the learning curve, like you kind of mentioned, but also to make it so that you don't feel like you're pigeonholing yourself only into one tool. Like I think kind of the common problem is that like, whatever artifacts you create are stuck in that specific tool, and it kind of feels like you've only committed to that aspect, and you kind of have to redo it for like any other tool, or once you like exit out of it, it doesn't come with you. So I think like thinking about how to solve those type of challenges are interesting. But along with that, like tools like I think like Form and Framer, like since they're a little bit open-ended, like they also encourage, I think they're really good at encouraging experimentation and like just exploring new like interaction paradigms, and definitely I think would be fun to see like where people take that. And then even like outside of like just user interface design, like I've found myself using Form for like other just like random creative projects that like don't have anything to do with like specifically creating like unique interactions for like mobile apps or something. It's just like creating fun little things that like work on the phone, and like they don't necessarily have to be an app, but just more of like a fun kind of creative experiment. So I think like opening yourself up to like thinking in that sense is like pretty valuable also.
Just if I can just play devil's advocate here for a minute, sometimes I wonder. It's like all this prototyping stuff is really a thing of the past few years, and I think that we have seen an increase in people's interest in that after sort of more, how do you say, flat design, for lack of a better name, became in vogue. So for example, before iOS 7, in the few versions before that, everything was very heavily texturized, and back then I had the idea that designers were losing themselves in making things overly ornate, and now I fear that they might flip the balance in the other that direction. How much is that of a concern to you? And also, might this be another fad, just like the iOS 6 style design was?
I think I have a good answer for this. I like when I see this stuff. So I like it when I see that happen to animations the first time, because it means that change is coming up. Like if something new is coming in and people are trying to adopt it, they're going to overdo it for a while, and then it's before it sort of settles in and gets to a next level, or like the right level. So I think you're right. We're going to see a lot of like overly interactive design things for like a year or two, but then it's going to settle to this good level where we're going to have good interaction design that makes sense. I really think you can't get there without the initial sort of like hype or whatever. So I wish I could, I wish we could skip it somehow, but we can't, and I think it's the way to get there. So I'm kind of happy that it's happening.
And I think, as experiences in the future become more cross-device, a little bit more transient for users, it's going to be less like sitting at a terminal and playing with an interface. It's going to be more about it's on your watch, it's on your phone, maybe it's on VR one day and things like that. And I think just that sort of jumping of context requires a certain level of interaction that I think that's the reality we're going to be faced with. And I agree. I hope we get past the overly animated, kind of knee-jerk reaction to not this that we're kind of in right now. But yeah.
I'd like to thank everyone for being here on the panel, and thank you all for coming today.